Well, hello again, everyone, and hopefully you managed to find your way in. Hope we didn't keep you waiting too long. It's a pleasure today to be introducing in Knowledge Connection 2020 someone I know for, well, over a decade, I guess. We have the pleasure of having Michiel Hildebrand with us today from Spinque. And Michiel and I actually were colleagues for a brief while back in Amsterdam, like I said, over 10 years ago. We were both in related areas in knowledge graph, what today actually is called knowledge graph. Back then it wasn't called that, but same difference. The topic was still the same. His was more on the visualization and UI UX side, and I guess he's kept to that. And this is what he's here to talk about today as well. So I'll get out of the way and let Michiel do it. The only thing to mention to you, if you want to share anything like questions, comments, or anything else, by now I guess you know the process. It's little chat box. I'll keep an eye on it, and in the end of the presentation, address your questions and comments to Michiel. So, Michiel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Nice to be here, and nice to see some familiar people in the participants list. All right, can you put on my screen share? I should unpause that and then quickly switch to this one. You should be able to see my slides now, right? So let's put it in full screen. So for Gogh Worldwide, I'm going to talk about. So this is a project we have been working on the last months. I work for a company called Spinque. You see the logo here at the bottom left. We are actually in the business of creating search solutions for knowledge graphs. And we're going to have a look at how we apply that here for this project for Worldwide. So before I say anything else, I should really give credit to the organizations and the people that were involved in this project. So here at the top, you see 3 cultural heritage organizations in the Netherlands. The one on the right you're probably familiar with, and here at the bottom you see some other companies, more technology companies, design companies involved in this project. And I myself, as I said, here at Spinque. So there's 3 things that I would like to do with you today in this talk. Of course, we're gonna have a look at Gogh Worldwide and why we're doing this and how. Next, I want to make a claim for cultural heritage organizations to connect their data. And finally, we're going to have a look at how we employ the concept of search design to access knowledge graphs. So let's start with Vincent. So Vincent van Gogh really is a worldwide phenomenon by now. So this is a visualization of his artworks where they are currently located. As you might wonder what is here in the Pacific Ocean. Well, this is actually Honolulu in Hawaii, right? So it's really spread out through all continents, all the way to Sydney, Australia. And what we do in projects like this is that we usually start from the end user perspective. So what are the search tasks that people are having for this type of data? Now you see here a picture, a little bit empty, as you probably can expect. During this presentation, we'll start filling the rest of this picture. But we start here from the right side. So what are the users here? Well, in this case, these are really professional users. So these are researchers in the art humanities domain. And here have a couple of examples of research questions that they have from actual people. For example, Van Gogh painted several artworks from the family Roulin in France. So which members of the family did he actually paint? A much more complicated question is this one. So for several artworks of Van Gogh, it's not exactly known when they were painted. And sometimes also the order in which they are painted. Was this one before the other one is not known. And finding this out is a big topic. And they use a lot of information from that. From this range is really from analyzing the paint, the actual material, to the canvas that it was used for it. For example, if two paintings use canvas from the same roll, this is of course an indication that they were created close by in time. Another picture, another question is actually, I think, for someone also attending now, it is more sort of a social aspect, right? So how are the paintings of Van Gogh perceived throughout time, right? They are exhibited for more than a century, and how were they perceived? How were they exposed together? How did people write about those paintings, and how did that change throughout the decennia? All right, so that should have given you an idea what we're trying to do here. So let's just go there. So you should see now the website, and let's try to start with the simple question that you just saw. Let's search for Roulin. Now, what you see here is 6 paintings made by Van Gogh. The first thing that I have to say is that these are actually not all the paintings by Van Gogh of this family, because at the moment we have collected all the paintings, or all the artworks, I should say, in the Netherlands, from a dozen institutions. The second phase is currently starting, and in this phase we're going to collect all the information from the other institutions. But already plenty to see here. But of course, this is not so spectacular yet. I mean, this you can also see on Wikipedia. So let's dive into it a little bit more. So, for example, this cute little boy. Now here it becomes more interesting, because already here on the right side you see images, and it becomes even more interesting if I open this, because these are actually available in high resolution. So this means I can zoom in and look at this boy's eyes. And this becomes even more interesting if I start looking at more technical recordings of this painting. So this is what is called breaking light, where the light is shed on the painting from the side. And this really gives a good view on how Van Gogh used his paint to create all kinds of effects, right? The thickness of the paint here. Another thing that's very interesting is this canvas is of course stretched on a frame, and this frame contains all kinds of information, right? So there are label stickers on it that indicated who has owned this painting and where it was, for example, exhibited. So here is actually one from 1928 from an exhibition in Germany. Later in time, I guess they wanted to protect this frame, and they added a cover on top of it, which when you borrow the painting, you're not allowed to take off. So the more recent exhibitions actually have their stickers here on this back panel. Okay, so let's close this high resolution view and scroll down a bit. Of course, there is object metadata about the artwork, but there's also various other things. For example, Van Gogh has written a lot of letters, mainly to his brother, but also to some colleagues. And in these letters, he often mentions his artwork. So the same for this artwork. So you can read about what he said about that. Who has previously owned these artworks, going from his brother to where it is currently located. And here we see those exhibitions. So what we saw there, the sticker at the background on the frame in 1928, is actually this exhibition. So we can click this exhibition and now see which other artworks were also exposed there. Right, so that gives you a completely different perspective on the artworks. Now, there are various other things that you can explore yourself after this presentation. So let's get back to the presentation. So what we've done now, we've seen sort of the user side. So what's happening in the background? Of course, there's all kinds of data coming from institutions, and somehow we want to create a knowledge graph out of this. Now, I want to approach this part of the talk from a sort of personal insight that I gained during this project. I've been working in cultural heritage already for about 15 years, coming from the technical perspective. But what I realized in this project is that there really is a wealth of knowledge in these organizations. So you can truly call them knowledge institutes. But what surprised me is that only a small part of this knowledge is actually available online. So, of course, these numbers are speculative that I present here, and this will not be the same for all. For some, this will be a lot more. But in general, there's really a lot of stuff that is not available online yet. Now, what we managed to do with Van Gogh Worldwide is to increase this. And so, for example, these exhibitions that I showed you and the high res photos are now made available. So in that sense, Van Gogh Worldwide has helped to reach the full potential for cultural heritage organizations. But what I truly believe is that for the cultural heritage organizations themselves, there is so much potential to gain if they start to organize themselves around connected data. So not only just for sharing that to other portals, but also for themselves, because it will empower them to do so many more things and truly be a knowledge institute on the web. So that's almost a call out to these organizations. So how should they do this then? Well, they should start within their organization. And so there's not just this collection management system from which you see a screenshot here on the left with this typical object metadata. That was actually the stuff that I have known for years. But there is so much more. Right? So you have already seen some of those assets, and some of the things you haven't seen is also X-rays or infrared photography. There's really a wealth of information there. Then there is documents, literature, research reports, publications, all discussing and providing interesting perspectives. So the organization should really organize this and start connecting this data. Secondly, they should connect to external authorities. There is a lot of knowledge inside, but outside there is a lot that can complement this. And here you see a couple of examples. For people in the cultural heritage domain, you're probably familiar with something known as the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, or in short, AAT. This provides very rich information, for example, about materials, type of paintings, etc. Of course, literature, for example, as modeled in VIAF. And in the Netherlands, there's a very interesting source collecting information about artists, museums, owners, etc. Right, so all this information provides a way of integrating data and at the same time providing additional background information. Okay, so giving these two things, connecting inside and connecting, adding external information to the inside, how to do that? Well, very good news that since a while now there is a community effort in this domain on a shared data model. They call this linked art. And this is a very nice initiative because what it does, it really tries to find a sweet spot on top of a very expressive model, which is called CDOC CRM, but which is maybe a bit complicated to use. And what linked art managed to do is really reach the sweet spot that made it possible for organizations to start express all this rich information that they have. And now here you see a snippet of that. Of course, we're not going to go into detail, but I do want to point out a couple of things here. So for example, the reference to an AT concept here and the reference to a place. And also interesting here is the modeling of dates, which actually allows you to model vagueness in dates. So that brings me to the last one, is that the quality of data is really a big thing. So a lot of time during this project was actually spent by the data owners in improving their quality. Right? So in the collection management systems, they often, for example, use not complete dates, and this is the case because they don't know the exact date. It's either in a period that is made, or they don't know exactly when it started or ended. And by allowing them to actually model this vagueness, we can then start doing things like sorting on date, which is of course not possible if you don't have a well-formatted date. But there are various other issues in data quality as well. Now, what we notice in this project is expressed here by this quote. So you can read it yourself. So what really happened is that once they saw their information being used on the web, and seeing, hey, this is actually not complete or this is wrong, that really was a big incentive to start improving their data. One of the examples, if you then have good data, you have it connected to external authorities. For example, here in Gogh Worldwide, you see these filters on the left side that you're obviously familiar with from all kinds of search applications. Now, here, this gives a very nice overview of, at the high level, what kind of different types of objects there are. If you've seen any website that aggregates, especially cultural heritage data from different sources, usually these things are a mess. Right, so what we do here, we use controlled vocabularies for all of them, meaning also that if you don't use them, you will not end up in these filters. But we provide some sort of flexibility, because although we show these high-level categories here, which was one of the wishes of the users, we allow also institutions to provide many more specific things. But by using the relations in this thesaurus, we can then provide the level that we need here in the interface. So we use the background knowledge for that. All right, let's come back to this picture. So we've seen now, coming from the right side, that we start to understand the search tasks that are involved here. We have seen how organizations can capture their knowledge, and they've actually been doing that themselves, right? So this is not that we start harvesting their data and do this. They actually have been doing this themselves, which was really cool for us. But clearly in this picture, there's a gap in the middle, right? So how are we going to solve the search task using this knowledge graph? That brings me to this part. And we need some sort of API, right, that goes to the website. But what happens before that is what we call relevance models. And I'll explain to you why we call it relevance models. Because what it has to do with for us is actually three types of queries. And if you're familiar with graph data, you're familiar with the first one, right? So structured graph queries, for example, give me all the artworks and sort them by their production date. Now, that's a very valid question. But in applications like this, there's usually a full text component as well. So what about the documents that mention Van Gogh's health? And in fact, in most cases, they combine these things, right? So there is structured and unstructured information combined, right? So in particular, this unstructured part, we're starting to deal with relevance, right? The aboutness. It's not just true or false. And what I like to show you is how we solve these things in Spinque Desk. So what we're trying to do is to really allow people to create these relevance models themselves. So what you should see now is Spinque Desk, which we run as a cloud service, and here the full API of the application is shown here. This is basically the whole API of the application, and for each endpoint, they are implemented as what we call strategies, or in other words, relevance models. And what I want to do with you is to actually create one. Not exactly what we use in these applications, but just to illustrate how we do that. And we do that in a visual programming interface. So here on the left side, we have a library of building blocks. And what we can do is we can drag those blocks onto the canvas, and there we can start creating relevance models. So to start with, I'm just going to take all the data that we have. So basically, you can say this is the graph that we have. And what I want to do here is I want to make a search engine for all the letters that Van Gogh wrote. So I'm not going to take all the data, but actually dragged in another block, and I'm going to filter my data on messages. So as you notice here, these are modeled with schema.org. So I select the messages. Now I can inspect the output here of this block, and we see here on the right side information. Let me increase this a little bit. So here are a number of letters. Now this is not a lot. This is 903. But let's create a search engine for this. For example, using the text of those letters. So what I can do is I can actually extract this text. There we go. And I configure this to actually take the text that we want to use And now we can say, let's build a document search engine for this. So this is a particular relevance model. And in fact, this is actually the model that is used by most off-the-shelf search engine systems like Solar, Elasticsearch. So basically what we're doing, we're building that here on the spot. So we just miss one component here, namely the input. And let's say for now that we want to search for mental health. Maybe we configure our search engine a bit. I know that we're talking about English here, so let's apply some stemming. And now the magic happens, because when I start inspecting the output, what the system does for you is actually create the indexes that are required, right? So, and in this way, you as a user don't need to think about what are the technical aspects that I need to realize, what kind of indexes do I need, but you can think at a much higher abstraction level, what should my relevance model actually look like? And what you see now that we actually find all kinds of results, and these are ranked, as you can see here in this probability distribution. And at the beginning we see here, maybe we're actually not going to inspect these results, but what if we start analyzing them? So we go sort of back to our graph, and let's say now we're interested in which periods these letters were written. So I'm going to extract actually the date that they were sent. There we go. And here we are at 1889, and 1888 is the most relevant years. Now, it turns out that Van Gogh actually cut off his ear in December 88. So it's not surprising that around this time he was writing mostly about his mental health. We can also do something else and say, hey, let's now look to something completely different. So from those letters, let's move to the artworks. And the artworks that he has mentioned in those letters. So what are actually the artworks most involved in this whole topic of his mental health? Now, this is probably a bit difficult to read for you. On the website, they're nicely formatted. But here you see that painting of Madame Roulin, which was actually painted at the end of 88. And here's another painting of the sunflowers, all sort of in that period. Now, I hope this gave you an idea how you can play with these things, create relevance models over both the text and the structured part. If I am correct, I have like 1 minute left. So let's briefly then look at how we are doing this. So if you're sort of in the knowledge graph domain, you're familiar with this picture, right? So what we have at the bottom, at the top of the iceberg is some sort of API that is used by an application. Underneath that, there is some sort of graph database and a graph query language. And what we find very interesting is to look at what are now the roles that are needed to solve these things, right? We need some developer to create these things. And this is typically just below the surface, just above the surface. Now, if you need full text support, then typically this is added on the side. And although there are solutions here, it's not very easy to combine these things. And what you need, of course, is someone that now has knowledge of both these things. So what we're trying to do, we actually push the technology all the way down. So at the lowest level, we actually implemented these things in one system, which is a probabilistic graph database. On top of that, we have a probabilistic relational algebra that can deal with these things. And if you're interested in that, you can read about that in the literature. Oh, sorry about that. But most importantly for us is that all of this is now under the surface. But above the surface, we now have a way that we can support information specialists to deal with accessing knowledge graphs and text in the same way to create relevance models that are needed for an application. And that is what I just showed to you. So to wrap this up, a lot of knowledge potential in cultural heritage organizations, but for that, they really need to understand their users. They need to capture their knowledge and finally model the relevance that is needed for the applications.
Great. Thanks, Michiel. Well, great slide. We have some questions from people, but I'll shamelessly take advantage of my position here, and I'll make the first question because, well, you triggered my interest with something you said. So you mentioned you're using a probabilistic graph database. I'm supposed to be the expert on graph databases, but I've never heard about it. Would you like to say like a couple of words of what it is, who built it, how it works?
Yeah, so the work originated actually in database, or actually to be more precise, is the merger of two fields, relational databases and information retrieval. At the end of the 1990s, work was done there. And basically what it means is adding a score column to a triple or quadruple. So we have lifted it from the database world to the graph world, so where we add scores. And now, what do you do with these scores? The interesting thing is that the research that I showed you there, there is an algebra to deal with these scores, right? How to combine them, how to add them, how to multiply them for different operations. So at the lowest level, there's actually graph with scores, but more importantly is at the top level is then how you use those scores for certain operations.
Okay. Well, yeah, you provided the reference, and I guess I or anyone else who's interested will have to look it up. But yeah, it's a very interesting concept. And let's see what people have been asking. Okay, another question is, which is very specific, I guess. What is the rank by text block? And I guess it's tied to one specific slide you had.
Yeah, so I use the rank by text, or more specifically, I use the rank by BM25, which is a relevance model. So this is used by Elasticsearch as well. And what it does, it implements this for you, right? So the actual query that you need is implemented in that block. So basically, you can grab whatever entities you have in your knowledge graph. You can say, I need this text, and sort of throw it in Elasticsearch as you want. But the nice thing is you don't need to, because the system does it for you. So we actually create the indexes that you need to create that search engine. So it all runs into the same system.
Okay, well, like many people are saying in the comments, that sounds really cool, actually. Another question, and again from me, you mentioned a certain vocabulary at some point, linked art, if I recall correctly. And you said it's a kind of good sweet spot, middle ground between different expressivity levels. And you also mentioned that it allows you, which kind of impressed me, it allows you to deal with vagueness, and specifically vagueness in dates. So would you like to expand a little bit on the expressivity part, and then maybe specifically on the vagueness?
Yeah. So what I specifically said is that it finds the right sweet spot between expressivity and ease of use. And so you could almost position it between schema.org, which is relatively easy to use, but for something rich and heterogeneous as we needed it for Gogh Worldwide, it was just not enough. Mm-hmm. And at the other hand, there is something known as CDOC CRM, which is an event-based model which allows you to model a lot of stuff, but to figure out how to use it is a bit complicated. So what Linked Art has done is what they call an application profile. So under the hood, they actually use CDOC CRM, they use their classes, they use their relations, the actual stuff. But they created what they call an application profile in JSON LD. So you can actually write it down quite simple in simple terms. And this is a community effort. So it's full of documentations. The patterns that you need come from actual use cases, from actual institutions. And we had some discussion with them. There were a couple of things that we needed, and things were changed. So this is still ongoing, but this really suited our needs. So if that would not have been there, this would be quite a drama to do. So that's that sweet spot. And the other question, about the dates. And so in this domain, people say late autumn 1888 or October 1900. And what it allows you to do is basically define the vagueness of a period. So there are things like the begin of the begin, the end of the begin of the end, and the end of the end. And so you describe vagueness of periods but you use actual XSD dates. So for a system, you now have proper dates that you can use. They might not be the exact date, but at least you can, for example, sort on something. And typically this is accompanied then by a textual description, something like late autumn 88, which you can display in the interface. So it sort of gives you the best of both worlds.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. I mean, both of those things that you described, well, the way that people have worked with the linked art vocabulary, to me sounds exemplary, basically. So making it easy for developers to use by leveraging JSON-LT and doing these different profiles that you mentioned. And then on the dates, this is like a notoriously difficult issue, how to manage overlapping dates and even more vague dates. So if they manage to address that, that's super cool.
Yeah. Of course, they need to create this data, right? And what you saw in this project is that the larger institutions like Van Gogh Museum, the Rijksmuseum, they were doing these things themselves. So they have their own pipelines for creator data mappings. For smaller institutions, we actually help them with it. I mean, smaller in sense of Van Gogh, right? So people providing like 10 artworks. So what I didn't show you, but in Spinque Desk, there is a part where you can actually create those mappings as well. So we help them with that part.
Okay, let's see. I think we may have one last question. Yeah, we do actually. So it says, technically, using the Spinque tool requires to upload data into a proprietary database.
Yes. I mean, we're coming a bit from the search area, so often we actually call it an index.
Yeah.
Right. So it's sort of a layer on top of your data. So we're not a data management system. We interface or we connect with existing systems. So yeah, but that is required. So we're not doing federated search. That is clearly something different.
Okay, yeah, that's clear. All right. Well, thanks once again to you, Michiel, and to everyone who attended. We'll have to wrap up here so we can move to the next session. So see you there, and see you also in the next session. Bye for now.